Every day, as dawn painted the sky with hues of gold and crimson, Charles would tread the familiar cobbled path that led through the heart of the town. This route took him past many antiquated structures, each with its own tale. One such structure was the dwelling of Mr. Elbridge, the town's respected yet reclusive antiquarian. His store, with its ornate facade and dusty windows, housed treasures and trinkets from worlds gone by. One overcast afternoon, as Charles walked by, his eyes were drawn to a captivating portrait displayed prominently in the window of Elbridge's store. An oil canvas depicted a woman from centuries past. Her flowing raven-black hair, porcelain skin, and delicate features seemed almost lifelike. Her eyes, however, were both beguiling and deeply unsettling. They beckoned Charles, whispering tales of bygone eras and forgotten romances. The next day, he returned to the store, driven by an urge he couldn't quite comprehend. Mr. Elbridge, a stooped man with spectacles perched on the bridge of his nose, greeted him. "Ah, I see the lady has caught your eye. An interesting choice. That portrait has been with me for decades, but few have shown interest in it." Charles, eager to have the piece, quickly made the purchase without delving much into its history. That evening, the woman from the canvas took her place as the focal point of his living room. Days transformed into weeks. The woman's face became an obsession for Charles. Her seemingly watchful gaze became a comforting presence in his solitary life. Friends who visited remarked on the uncanny sensation of being observed, but Charles dismissed it as an artist's trick. From the moment Charles laid eyes on the portrait, he was completely captivated by the woman's enchanting beauty. Her perfectly sculpted features and the delicate play of light and shadow rendered on canvas hinted at an artist of exceptional skill. There was something thrillingly lifelike about the raven locks encircling her brow and of her pale dress. However, what truly intrigued Charles was the seeming illusion of her glances, which appeared to follow him around the room. He marveled at this artistic technique, dismissing it as a clever parlor trick designed to enthrall viewers. But as days turned into nights, and the cycles of the moon played out in the vast expanse of the sky, Charles's initial fascination began to wane, replaced by a growing unease. Each evening, as he settled into his favorite armchair, he felt the weight of her watch more intensely. The eyes that he had once found mesmerizing now seemed to delve deep into his soul, their unrelenting stare threatening to shatter the thin veneer of comfort he clung to. Sleep, which had once been his refuge, now eluded him. Night after night, he would toss and turn, haunted by vivid dreams of the woman stepping out of the frame, her eyes always fixed on him. The boundaries between reality and nightmare began to blur. Then, on a particularly dark and still night, as the world around him lay wrapped in silence, Charles was jerked awake by soft, insidious whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls of his house. The inky blackness of his surroundings was punctuated only by the soft silver glow of moonlight filtering in through the windows. Driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, Charles felt an inexorable pull toward the living room. Each step felt like an eternity, and the rhythmic pounding of his heart seemed to echo the whispered warnings that filled the air. When he finally reached the living room, a cold shock coursed through him. The once detailed portrait, which had been the source of both admiration and unease, was now eerily blank. The mesmerizing woman, with her piercing gaze, had vanished without a trace. The realization dawned on Charles that perhaps the portrait's mysteries were more than just artistic mastery. They were a doorway to something much more sinister. The silence of the room was shattered by an eerie sound, almost like the hiss of a serpent. Whispers, ethereal and chilling, slithered from the shadowed recesses behind him, each word dripping with a cold malevolence that sent shivers down his spine. As Charles slowly pivoted on his heels, every fiber of his being screamed at him to flee. Yet he remained rooted to the spot, his movements echoing the heavy weight of his fast-depleting courage. Emerging from the very darkness he had grown to fear was the woman. She was no longer confined to the canvas that once held her. The magnetic allure of her eyes, which had once been a source of admiration, was replaced with a void that seemed to drink in the light around her. Those eyes were now sunken hollows, reflecting the abyss she'd emerged from. Her lips, once soft and inviting, were twisted into a grotesque grin that seemed to revel in Charles's horror. As he backed away, her hand reached out for him. It wasn't a human hand anymore, but a macabre meld of reality and the painted world, with fingers that seemed to drip with thick, oily pigment. The moment her fingers made contact with Charles's chest, a bone-chilling cold seeped into him. The room around him blurred and contorted, as if he was looking through a warped lens. Charles's very essence seemed to be sucked out, his form liquefying and blending seamlessly with the textured strokes of the painting. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but his voice was lost, his will paralyzed. The last sight that met Charles's eyes, before his world was flattened into the two-dimensional prison of the canvas, was the woman. She gracefully retreated, her form blending back into the painting, leaving behind only her haunting eyes and the triumphant curve of her smile, a cruel declaration of her victory. When morning's first light pierced through the room, the golden rays illuminated the portrait in an almost mocking spotlight. There, beside the sinister woman, stood a new figure. It was Charles, his face a mask of pure terror. His painted eyes, filled with anguish and despair, seemed to track anyone who dared look upon the artwork, a chilling testament to his perpetual torment and the woman's malevolent power.